The sun crawled slow across the roofs of Dry Creek, casting long shadows that clung to doorframes like memories that wouldn't die. The town was quiet that morning, but not with peace, more like the stillness before a dust storm rolls in. Folks stood on porches or leaned out of shop doors, not to greet the day, but to watch her. Clara Bellamy moved through the street like a forgotten song, simple, familiar, and haunting. Her black skirts brushed the dirt, kicking up tiny storms of ash-colored dust as she walked past the saloon and toward the jailhouse behind it. She wore no bonnet, no jewelry, just the black veil that fluttered in the wind like something clinging to life long after it should have let go. Whispers chased her like stray dogs. Still mourning after 2 winters? Maybe she's finally snapped. Someone ought to speak to the preacher. She didn't look at them. Clara had long since learned that in Dry Creek, looking back only invited cruelty. Her husband, Miles Bellamy, had been a kind man but too trusting. That fire took him fast, burned through the barn like paper. And when she'd cried for help, the neighbors had watched from their porches, held their coats tighter, said nothing, did nothing. So she'd buried him alone, dug the grave with her own blistered hands while the town's men sat in the saloon, sipping whiskey and inventing apologies that never reached their mouths. But that wasn't why she was walking now, not exactly. Behind the jailhouse, beneath a warped awning and a rusted sign that read Dry Creek Holding, sat a cage. Not made for livestock, but a man. Iron bars welded tight. A padlock rusted over from too many seasons left out in the rain. Inside, hunched like a wild thing at the edge of dying, sat Jonas McCrae, what the town called the Mountain Man. No one knew where he came from. He'd been brought in by bounty riders who claimed he'd murdered 3 men over a game of cards near the Bitterroot Ridge. But there'd been no trial, no proof, just a body in the dirt and a story told loud enough to be believed. Since then, Jonas had said not one word. Just sat there, silent as stone, wrapped in thick pelts even in the summer heat, his beard a tangled forest, his eyes dark hollows watching everything and nothing. Children tossed stones near his cage until their mothers pulled them back. Boys dared each other to shout at him. The sheriff would beat his boot against the bars now and then, just to hear the sound. But Clara had come with something else. That morning, she held a small tin cup of water. Clean water. Cool. She knelt before the cage, and though Jonas did not stir, she set it gently beside the bars. "You'll drink or you won't," she said. "But I won't have it on my soul that I passed by a thirsty man." Someone behind her laughed, sharp like breaking glass. "Bringing gifts to a murderer, Widow Bellamy?" She didn't turn. "Not a gift," she said. "A courtesy." She walked away, her heart thudding like hooves across dry ground. The next day she came back. This time with a small loaf of bread, still warm from her hearth. She laid it where the cup had been. She didn't speak, but lingered. Long enough to see his hand, calloused, shaking, slide out from the shadow and take the bread in. She nodded and walked off. By the 3rd day, the town had turned its eyes full on her. Miriam Dorsey, the preacher's sister, stood on the mercantile steps and whispered like poison dripping slow from a tin spout. "She's gone soft. You know what grief'll do to a woman? Make her forget what's decent." Sheriff Cranmer stepped onto the boardwalk, thick-chested and sunburned, mustache curling like a vulture's wings. "Clara," he said, loud enough for the street to hear. "You keep feeding him. Folks'll start thinkin' you want him for a pet." Clara looked at the sheriff like a woman who had already lost everything that mattered. "I know what it is to starve, Sheriff. And I reckon I know what it is to be in a cage no one else can see." He scoffed, spitting tobacco near her boot. "Be smart now. There's a reason we keep him locked. He ain't right." But she didn't answer. That night, Clara sat by her hearth with a velvet pouch she hadn't opened in nearly 2 years. Inside lay her wedding ring, gold dulled by time, the inscription nearly worn smooth. She hadn't worn it since the morning after the funeral. Not because she didn't love him still, but because grief had grown into something different, like ice turning to glass. Fragile, clear, sharp in all the wrong places. The next morning, she walked into the sheriff's office and laid the ring on his desk. "I'll take him," she said simply. "Bring him to the ranch. He can work. He'll earn his food, his rest. You won't see him again." The sheriff blinked, laughed. "Take him?" he repeated. "What the hell does that mean, Clara?" "I mean you open that cage and let me lead him out. I'm trading you something precious for something broken. That's fair in Dry Creek, isn't it?" Otis Cranmer looked down at the ring. "You can't buy a man, widow." "I'm not buying him," she said, voice low and steady. "I'm freeing him. You've held him long enough with no charge. Unless the law's changed." He stared at her a long time, torn between pride and discomfort. Then he stood and grabbed the keys from the wall, muttering, "If he guts you, I'll not clean up the mess." Outside, the townsfolk had gathered. Word spread fast in places like Dry Creek. Clara approached the cage as the lock clicked. Jonas didn't move. She knelt and for the first time, looked him full in the face. "I have land. I have fences that need mendin'. I have no one but a tired horse and a God who hasn't said much in years. You come with me or you don't. But if you stay here, you'll die behind these bars." His eyes met hers then. Not fierce. Not wild. Just tired. He stood. Slow. Bones creaking. And followed. The crowd parted as she walked beside him, chains still dragging in the dirt. Someone shouted something foul. Another laughed. Clara didn't blink. She kept walking, the mountain man at her side, the prairie wind at her back, and the weight of the whole town's judgment clinging to her like smoke. But she didn't feel ashamed. No, there was something else moving in her chest. The faintest flicker of something she hadn't felt since before the fire. Hope. The first morning on Clara Bellamy's ranch was cold, though the sun had barely risen. Dew clung to the grass like it had something left to grieve. Jonas McCrae stood near the porch, the fur cloak hanging off his shoulders like a molted skin. His eyes scanned the fence line, the chicken coop, the low-roofed barn. He made no sound, just breathed in deep and heavy, as though trying to decide if freedom was real or just another shape of confinement. Clara watched him from the kitchen window, her fingers wrapped around a chipped enamel cup. She hadn't expected him to stay. Not really. Men like him didn't belong to the world anymore. They floated at the edge of it, between bear and man, between hunted and forgotten. But he hadn't run. Not yet. He didn't eat much that day, just the bread she left on the porch railing and a small strip of salted pork. When she spoke, he said nothing. When she handed him gloves, he took them, but didn't meet her eyes. And when she pointed to the fallen gate near the pasture, he walked to it and started lifting timbers like they weighed nothing at all. So it went. 4 days. They didn't talk, not with words. But something moved between them, steady as breath. At dawn, she'd bring tools to the porch. By evening, she'd find another job done. Fence mended, kindling chopped, shingles nailed down with precision. Every now and then, she'd find a wooden carving left on the stoop. A coyote curled in sleep, a rabbit mid-bound, a hawk in flight. Small things, but made with care. And each time, her heart did something strange, like a door clicking open in a part of her that had stayed locked for years. It was on the 9th evening, under a sky soft with twilight, that he finally spoke. "I didn't kill them." Clara was on the porch, shelling beans into a tin bowl. The rhythm stopped. She didn't look at him. Just listened. They'd already done it. The miners. Killed a family, took the claim, burned the cabin. I came on it too late. One of 'em drew. I didn't miss. His voice was low, scraped raw from disuse. But clear. I dragged the bodies down to town. Figured the law would want truth. But truth didn't matter. I look like this. He gestured vaguely at himself, at the beard, the height, the wilderness clinging to his skin. They saw what they wanted to see. Clara nodded, slow and sure. "That sounds about right." He looked at her then. Really looked. "Why'd you take me out of that cage?" She set the bowl down. The beans rolled softly against the tin. Because I know what it is to be called a name that don't belong to you. To live past your usefulness in the eyes of others. She folded her hands in her lap. And because I had more fence than I could fix alone. A silence fell between them, but it was warm, not sharp. The days after that felt different. He moved with less hesitation, and she with less fear. They shared meals, still mostly quiet, but the silence became companionable. She caught him humming once while working in the barn, a sound like wind through pine trees. And he began fixing things she hadn't asked him to, little things, like the squeaky hinge on the pantry door or the broken glass pane above the sink. One morning, she found her old swing repaired and hanging from the cottonwood. She stood beneath it a long while, hand on the rope. Then she sat. The wood creaked beneath her, familiar and new all at once. But peace never sat long in Dry Creek. The news came by way of dust. Miriam Dorsey riding in hard with 2 men from the sheriff's office trailing behind. Their horses were still breathing heavy when they dismounted in front of Clara's porch. She stepped outside, apron dusted with flour, hair pinned back in a loose bun. Jonas was already by the barn, watching, hands clenched by his sides. Miriam didn't waste breath. I warned you, Clara. He's a danger. Sheriff says he broke his confinement. Law says he's to come back. Clara stared at the woman, her mouth tight, her eyes calm. There was no confinement. No charges. Just a cage and a coward with a badge. One of the deputies stepped forward, hand on the hilt of his pistol. Ma'am, please. We don't want trouble. Clara's voice didn't rise. But it gained something else. Wait. Iron beneath lace. You didn't come when the barn burned. When I screamed for help, you shut your windows and finished your supper. You never cared what became of me. But now I feed a man, and you think that makes me dangerous? Miriam's face twitched. He's a killer. So were half the men who founded this town, Clara said. But they wore clean boots, so you built them statues. Jonas stepped beside her then. No weapons, no words. Just presence. Tall and quiet and unafraid. Clara placed a hand on his arm, not for his sake, but for theirs. If you plan to drag him out, she said, you'll need to go through me. The deputies exchanged a glance. Miriam sputtered, but the men did not move forward. Something in Clara's posture, something in the silence behind Jonas's eyes, warned them off. It wasn't just stubbornness. It was justice standing on a porch in a dusty apron, holding ground the way mountains do. They left without a shot fired. Later that night, she and Jonas sat on the porch swing, side by side. The moon was high, and the crickets sang like they remembered better days. She took the old ring from her apron pocket, the one she'd traded to the sheriff, and held it in her palm. The gold looked dull now, like it had served its purpose and was ready to rest. Without a word, she rose, walked to the cottonwood, and buried it beneath the roots. Not in grief. Not to forget, but to mark something ending, and something beginning. When she came back, Jonas stood, holding the carving of a bear cub in his calloused hand. For you, he said. You kept me whole. She didn't cry. Just reached out and touched his wrist, lightly. You built this place, she said softly. I just happened to be standing in it when you came. They sat again, shoulder to shoulder. The swing creaked beneath their weight. Wind moved through the cottonwood, soft as a prayer. And though no one spoke of love, it was there, in the quiet, in the wood beneath them, in the dirt where the past had been laid to rest. It lingered like a promise, unspoken but true. Some things don't need words. Some hearts mend slowly in the quiet. And when they do, they beat stronger than before.